Hello, my name is Victoria Sossaman, and this is my final presentation for LS 2301. Today I'm going to be talking about the relativity of reality and kind of just how science and philosophy go hand in hand. So for most of human history, we kind of took for granted that now meant the same thing for everyone. We just assumed that time was this universal concept. But the 20th century revolution in physics kind of helped us to understand that that was not necessarily the case. It uprooted all these long-standing philosophical beliefs that time was this same thing for everyone. And so today I'm going to kind of walk you through Newton's like absolutism beliefs and kind of how we got there and then how it kind of got dismantled by Einstein along the way. So the paradigm shift. So basically to help us understand to how we got to where we are today. So historically we lived in a world of fixed universals. So time was this backdrop, space was this container. Um, and then when Einstein introduced relativity, he didn't just change how we measured speed, he introduced the idea that reality itself is perspective dependent. Um, and then was kind of how this like feedback loop was created because this new scientific data comes about and it kind of uproots these long-standing philosophical beliefs, but then philosophy is the same thing that helps us to understand and make sense of this new scientific data that comes about. So first we're going to start off with Newton. Um, and so in 1687, Newton laid out what he called the scholium to the definitions. And he basically argued that for motion to be real, rather than just this illusion, there had to be this fixed reference frame, this fixed stage upon which it occurs. Um, and then this is one of his famous quotes: absolute, true, and mathematical time of itself and from its own nature flows equably without relation to anything external. So for Newton, time didn't care if you were standing or if you were standing still or if you were moving. It was this universal equable flow. Similarly, he viewed space as an immovable container. He thought that if you took all the matter out of the universe, that the container would still be there, fixed and eternal. Um, And he wasn't just like making this up or making a random guess. He provided an argument to support himself, and this was known as the rotating bucket experiment. So here, you can see it in the pictures here. It was these buckets of water that were hanging on this rope, and the rope was twisted. So whenever you let go of the rope, the bucket would spin, and at first the water would stay flat. But as the water kind of starts to spin with the bucket, it becomes concave, as you can see on the picture right here on the right. The water kind of starts to cave in. And Newton argued that this was happening. He argued that it wasn't happening because the water is moving relative to the bucket, because at that moment the water and the bucket are moving together. Instead, he thought that the curve of the is an effect of the water moving relative to absolute space itself. So he thought that space was its own real physical thing, according to Newton. That's what he thought. Um, and for Newton, this wasn't just physics. There was a theology aspect to it. So he believed that because God is omnipresent, meaning that he's everywhere at all times, that absolute space has to exist in order for God to be everywhere all the time. There has to be absolute space. Um, which kind of opposed Descartes's view because he thought that space was just this relationship between objects. But Newton argued that space was its own thing in and of itself, not just a relationship between objects, but it has its own existence. Um, and this kind of helped us to understand this idea of a shared present that we relied on for a really long time. So now we're going to move on to Einstein, who came along in the 20th century and he kind of crumbled down Newton's ideas, or this one specifically. So in 1905, Einstein showed that Newton's universal clock was a myth by discovering the relativity of simultaneity. So, if you can kind of see it in this picture here, but basically, like, there were two lightning bolts striking the front and back of a moving train. A person watching from the ground might see them hit at the same exact time, but a person on the moving train will see one hit before they see the other. And so Einstein had the math to back this up that both of them are correct and that there is no like master clock that decides one's right and one's wrong. It's just that if now depends on how fast you're moving, then Newton's shared present idea is wrong. Um, and it also helped us to understand that time and space cannot be separate and that they're woven together. This kind of leads us to like this led us to a big philosophical conclusion. So this idea of a block universe. So basically if my now is your future and your now is my past, then the past, present, and future must all be equally real. So it's not like a movie clip playing frame by frame, but rather like this giant block of ice where everything's kind of frozen inside already. So, being born, going through life, any moment, and then like being dying, like it's all in this block. And so time is basically just this fourth dimension in there. And it's not that the future is not yet. It's just at a different location in this block. Um, However, not everyone accepted this idea that everything was just frozen in this continuum. So, this Henry Bergson was a French philosopher and he challenged Einstein. And Bergson argued that science spatializes time. And so it treats time like a line on a map that you can look at all at once. But Bergson argued that this misses the most fundamental truth of existence, which is duration. Um, and so for Bergson, time is a lived flow. So it's an act of becoming which can't be captured by snapshots in the movie or this 4D block. And he argued that relativity might be a great tool for accurate measurement, but it's a poor description of reality. And he's a French philosopher. He kind of pushed the scientists to be more technical with their terms, and kind of trying to figure out if the math that they were um, coming up with described the universe as it really was or how we measured it. So this kind of brings us to the core debate of my presentation. So on the left side here, we have presentism, which was Bergson's idea. And then on the right side, we have eternalism, um, which is the block universe idea, which fits Einstein's math. And then back to the presentism. it argues that only the present is real and that time is this dynamic process. So that's kind of the big comparison between these two ideas. Um, and this is important because it's important for us to understand that science provides the how, like it tells us how the clock slows down. Um, that science and physics kind of give us the how, but philosophy are how we make sense of it and how we kind of determine what's real and not what just and not based strictly on what the math says. Um, so basically in conclusion, the along the way from Newton to Einstein, it kind of helps us to understand that our view of reality is constantly evolving and always changing with the more knowledge that we gain, and that we have to use science and philosophy together in order to come up with these, with the fuller picture of everything. Thank you. Oh, these are my sources. So the pictures in here, these were where they came from. And then these were the sources that I used to for my presentation.